Reminder to sign in on the attendees list. We'll get started in, give people 1 more minute to show up. All right, should we kick things off? First thing on the list is introductions and new faces. Looks like we have a little smaller group today. I don't see any new people. I guess Sukil, have you been to one of these before? You want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Sakil. I'm part of the Build Service program. I think I've been to one of this before, but it's been a long time, I guess.
All right. Next thing on the list is release planning and updates. I guess it's usually Javier and Emily. Any updates today?
I believe we will be going into CCB next week for pack release. So if there's any changes that you want to get in, please have the PR up. That's about it.
No new updates here.
Awesome. We'll do the 10-minute review of outstanding RFCs. I'm going to share my screen and skip, unless anybody thinks otherwise, I'm going to skip drafts and also the other RFCs that are listed, chat about today. Everybody see?
Looks good.
And sorry, fixing my Zoom. Okay. This is a draft and talking about today, talking about this today. It's also on the list. This is also on the list. Life cycle arguments is not on the list and it's not a draft. This is approved and in a final comment period, does this just need to get merged?
Friday will be its end of FCP. I encourage Emily and me to respond to the stuff until the official close of FCP.
Offline build packages, RFC. I think Dan was going to do this on Thursday and present what he's got there. He's made some changes, responded to a lot of the feedback. Like I think got rid of the list somewhere else. It looks pretty good. There are some outstanding questions around it too, though I know. The next one is pack image pull policy. Is that on the list? Yes, it's on the list today. RFC for stack metadata. That's cache up. I think he just responded back here. This got and he added some examples there yesterday and it got approved. I think this thing is just waiting for approval. And Ben is the only one to approve so far. Any other actions that need to be taken besides folks adding approvals to this one? Just adds additional metadata about the stack.
Yeah, I think we just need to probably catch up with the stuff that he's added since last time.
Cool, sounds good. Root build pack. Joe, do you want to put this off until?
Yeah, we'll pause this until we can discuss the application mixins.
Sounds good. CA search is draft. Image exposes metadata for all layers that participated in an image's build. This is Paul Alvarez. I guess Emily, any updates from Paul?
I haven't spoken to him since the last working group.
Cool. And app image extensions goes along with mixins. And thus we conclude our less than 10-minute review of RFCs. Next thing on the list, just to dive right in, because we got a bunch of RFCs today, is inline build packs. Joe, do you want to take this? Sorry.
Sure. I don't think I put it on the list, so I wasn't sure if somebody else had a particular thing they wanted to talk about. I see Terrence has a couple comments that make sense. Oh, no, I didn't understand what you meant by an inline table in the second comment, Terrence.
Oh, I just wonder if you want to separate it out, like you could have buildpacks.inline or something for specifically inline, and then put shell and whatever in there to make it distinct from another one or a normal build pack. It's more a proposal than like a thing I'm locking on of just maybe some schema change stuff to think about. I was thinking like it is actually, even though it is a build pack, it is to some degree a separate concept and has just a different schema of what is in the build packs table. And I wonder if we want to make that more explicit or distinct from the normal thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just didn't see the example you have here. I don't actually see how it's different.
Oh, it just like puts it in a table inside of the table, I think.
All right, we'll talk about it offline because I don't get it. I'm not opposed. I just don't get it.
Yeah. I guess my only other comments were mostly around detect. I think it's maybe worth expanding some of the reasonings, which makes sense of like why we don't want to do it. And I think detect's confusing for people who aren't as familiar with build packs. And then I actually don't see a reason why we wouldn't allow people potentially to publish if like they want, like providing a way potentially to package up inline build packs and publish them to the registry. Like you could totally imagine an inline build pack that read potentially that part of the thing from Project Toml. I don't know. It doesn't seem crazy to me.
Yeah, I don't think we're doing anything that would prevent it from working. So maybe if we see people starting to try and publish them, we make it possible. I think it'd be pretty easy for Pack to use whatever mechanism it uses for creating the temporary build pack, and then do the same thing and then just publish it. So
Inline build packs don't have a version in this. I'm pretty confused about how publishing would look here. It's like you have an app and then you're trying to publish a build pack that's part of your app up to a registry, and then it gets a version, and then we convert it into files.
You'd have to require a version at that point. I think right now we're saying it's either optional or ignored.
What does it actually write to disk when the version is missing?
I'd propose 000.
I'd like to see another RFC about publishing those, because I think to me that like it's a whole, I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea. It just seems like it creates a lot of additional questions and complexity.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. I'm fine with that.
I'll make a comment about that. We can leave it open. Just a possibility in the future.
Yeah, I was mostly just refuting the no that a lot of people thumbs up from Emily. That I don't think it's actually exclusive. I guess the other interesting thing from here was the discussion about root build packs, but I think I was pushing in favor of like until root build packs get finalized, it's probably out of scope of this RFC.
This would let an app developer add a root build pack that would break rebasing when rebasing would otherwise work. So like falls into the large category of how do we do root build packs, and what do we want to provide any guarantees, if any? Do we want to support rebasing with root build packs, things like that. Cool.
So going back, I kind of wanted to pry into the detection phase. I'm not proficient in build packs, at that level, but I am curious. There is a mechanism that allows them to basically specify what they provide and what they require, right, for the build phase. So is that not something that we might want from an inline build pack?
Sure, I think nothing's stopping you from creating a real build pack though at that point. Like I feel like if you are at the point of providing a JDK or whatever it may be, you're kind of out of the realm of what we intend to support or the problem we intend inline build packs to solve. Yeah.
We also, this interplays a little bit with, on the Pacato side, they have a build pack that lets you put a plan.toml in your app directory and require things from build packs. So if you used an inline build pack and that together, you could be requiring stuff and hook into the build process, right? And then you sort of have that extra functionality. But if you're able to do requires and provides of things inside of the project toml's list, that also looks kind of like the same thing. So I don't know how that all interplays together, but it's it feels a little bit divergent. So for me, it's like this is like a very simple, restrictive thing that accomplishes some use cases, and so I'd kind of support this moving forward without like where detection just always passes, and then we can follow up with more RFCs if we like have additional things we think inline build packs should be able to do.
Yeah, I guess the comments that I made around detection were mostly that I think potentially, unless you're really familiar with how the build pack process works as a build pack author, like you may not be aware that detect necessarily runs in parallel, and that you potentially, at least coming from like Dockerfile, right? Like that you don't know that like I think if you put a build pack between like say like after another build pack, you may not realize that detect does not have access to any of the kind of layers or build artifacts that are produced, I think, on the surface, unless you're more familiar with how build packs work. So I think that could be a confusing experience to end users, at least for now.
Agree.
Yeah, I guess in any case, it's not preventing from additional functionality being added in the future, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Anything else on inline build packs? I'm going to encourage us to move along a little bit because then we have a few other RFCs.
Yep. Good.
Cool. Next thing on the list is read-write platform volume mount.
Just an encouragement to take a final look at this. We are currently in a position to go to FCP. We have enough approvals sort of out of the core team. I specifically would like anyone interested in PAC, say Javier, to give me one final blessing before we actually move it to FCP, since it has changed a bit and is directly affecting PAC at this point.
Did you address my recent comment by chance?
Was it the last one asking for a warning? Or is there one after that?
No, but yeah, the one asking for a warning, but also I guess like probably the more controversial thing around kind of Linux file system permission stuff.
No, but I also didn't see it. I will take a look at that.
So I did look at it real quick before this meeting, and I have a question where it says that this only applies to PAC. I am curious how that's possible if the spec itself has it as a read-only parameter or directory.
Well, it doesn't apply. It basically superimposes on top of it. This won't end up with a change in any specification that's currently written, as the RFC currently stands. This will be a feature added to PAC, which basically will allow you to violate the spec if you choose to use the feature. As in, you could map it on top of CNB. Okay.
Yeah, I guess that's a part where I have some contention, where the spec itself, I guess we're doing something against the spec.
Yeah, and Terrence made a request. Like there was a comment where I said, Terrence was, should we exclude spec reserved directories? And I was originally in favor of that. And Emily had come back and said, well, if we allow spec reserved directories, it makes actually developing build packs and developing the life cycle and developing all those kinds of things easier for us. And so my suggestion was to split the difference and allow you to mount over the top of those things, but print out a warning that you were doing something that was not spec compliant at that point.
So does that
Alternately,
make the build packs non-compliant as well? Thinking about the unsafe directory and basically putting stuff in.
There won't be an unsafe directory at all anymore.
Oh, okay. I guess that's what changed.
This is
Yeah.
just arbitrary read-write volume mounts anywhere you want in the whole container during build with no rules.
I
Yeah.
see.
Yeah.
I think that's the hard part about these RFCs. Like the conversations go on and it morphs so intensely. But yeah, okay,
Yeah.
got it. I'm back in line. Got it.
Any other questions about this RFC? I'm going to push this along to next thing on the list then, which is pack image pull policy.
Cool. I don't know if it's worth sharing, but maybe just for the sake. See, I made some changes a couple days ago and requested some re-review. I've brought back the scope of this to not change the default and only really change the flag and a new policy, if not present. And this will enable new functionality that then there will be additional RFCs for that we've talked about. Things like changing the default to something like potentially periodic, which is very different to what the ecosystem currently has. And also having other capabilities where we have more granular control as to what images this policy applies to. And that's something that I believe others have asked for as well.
We're going to keep no pull for backwards compatibility for an amount of time.
Yes, and it goes into that.
Awesome. Are we open to always supporting no pull just because it looks like Docker and people might continue to pass it, or do we really want to deprecate it eventually?
I'm in favor of deprecating it just because there wouldn't be an alternative for a lot of the other options that potentially come up. And so it would look awkward.
I don't have a strong opinion. I feel like, yeah, I don't have a strong opinion. Cool. Any questions about that one? All right, then I guess we have a good chunk of the rest of the time to talk about application mixins, which I know a few people are here from the KPAC team are also interested in learning about that too. Joe, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Let me go ahead and share. So last week I had an existential crisis in talking about the root Buildpack stuff. We were working through some of the problems and constraints we wanted to put on them. Hold on one second. Sure. And as we were going through that, it started to feel like we were just solving those problems and we weren't really focused on solving the problem for like the end user, right? Like we were building cool tech. So I took a total step back after we did some spitballing last Thursday using a concept called Stack Pack, which is just funny that I keep coming up with different variations of the name Buildpack. But the interface is very different. Stack Packs actually borrow quite a bit from the root Buildpack concept, except that they're a little less end user facing. So the interface that we want, I think everybody kind of agreed with this, but the interface that we want for the end user is more like mixins. So why not double down on mixins and allow applications to define their own mixins? And so that's basically what I'm proposing in this RFC. That's really simple. The rest of it is how that works. That's just the complicated part. And how it works is essentially a stack pack. So builders will ship or can ship with a type of build pack that runs as root, and it runs against the stack, and it doesn't have access to the application code. So its only job in life is to mutate the stack or to extend or enrich the stack, I guess, rather. So there's a bunch of detail in here about how that works. It's worth reading over. The questions that I put in the notes here that were really things I was struggling with were how to actually specify the stack packs in the builder. Obviously you'd probably include them like a normal build pack, but like, do they go into order? And the thing that comes to mind, or the use case that I'm worried about, is where you're using a third-party build pack, like Joe's Python build pack, and it requires a SQLite mixin. And if we really want to not force end users to have to, add an extra stack pack to their project toml or something like that, then we don't want the use of that third-party build pack to sort of override or shadow all the orders that might include stack pack as optional. So I was wondering if we wanted a separate like order-like construct specifically for stack packs. That's one of them. The other was if we wanted to define types for mixins, which I thought I had sketched some of this up. Oh yeah. So in order to communicate that a stack pack is going to provide a mixin, or maybe like a pattern of mixins, like star, we don't want to inadvertently have an apt build pack say that it's going to provide something that's like set equals. So I'm proposing that this new mixin table in the build plan have type, which for now can be package or set. And when the mixins that are asked for by a build pack or by an app are sort of unrolled into this, or compared to the mixins that are provided in the build plan or whatever, like it'll actually take that into account. The other open question was about upgrades. I'm not sure if we want to have stack packs be required to be ABI compatible, or declare that they will keep ABI compatibility, or just not at all, and just some of the questions around that. Yeah, and then here's an example. So I'll open up the discussion. That's kind of the gist of it.
Very logistically for type, the reason I proposed the pattern matching, or like you just use regex for it as opposed to something more explicit, is that the concept, the spec defines mixin very loosely, and the concept of set versus package that we've defined for the Bionic stack is just applicable to the Bionic stack and isn't codified in the spec anywhere. And so adding right, so like your solution is exactly what I thought of first. Like, oh yeah, you just have different types of mixins. That's pretty simple, but it actually doesn't work with how we've defined mixins so far. And so I went to say, well, any name that doesn't have an equal sign in it or whatever is how the apt build tag works for Bionic, because we've defined Bionic such that the equal sign is a special character that means you're not talking about you're talking about some other concept. You're not talking about just a package name. So if that's helpful for explaining the motivation behind the regex solution that I proposed over slide.
I mean, is it so loose that like I settled on this in part because I was reading the Bionic mixins RFC again, and that's where it says basically if it doesn't have an equal sign, it's a package. I think that's what it says, right? Yep. Which is why I settled on this, but then I wasn't thinking about it being specific to the Bionic stack. So, I mean, is it possible that an apt build pack would try to provide some random mixin name that isn't actually a package? Is that like what we're worried about?
I think the problem, or what I would worry about, is if the build pack requests a set and the set isn't fulfilled by the stack, then that set would get sent to the apt build pack, and then the apt build pack would try to apt get install it. And I think the right behavior, in my head, the right behavior should be the app build pack doesn't like specifies in its detection filter, right? That
Yeah.
it's only able to provide packages. It's not able to provide sets. Consider
So-
what would happen if, sorry.
So you're saying and basically nothing, something that doesn't have an equal sign is the mechanism for that, right?
Right. I mean, like that's what I did in the regex. I don't know if that's the best way to do it, but another case to think about is if you had multiple stack packs and one could provide sets and the other could provide packages, being able to say, this can provide set equals star, and this can provide anything that's not an equal sign would be a really clean way of saying, here's a build package that can actually provide a set, right? Like maybe you wanted to create your operator and you wanted to create a custom one that could just provide sets that look like this or this, but also apt Buildpack still works with it, right? That'd be an advantage of using the wildcard matching.
Mixins can be anything, right? Like, could I name just like a Heroku stack mixin, right? And it's not an apt package? Or is it defined somewhere that they have to be an OS package?
For Bionic, it's defined somewhere that they have to be. For the ID, IO Buildpack stacks Bionic, they have to be an app package. For other stack IDs, they don't have to be, but because the app stack pack could be, we could produce one that's just certified for Bionic or just certified for stacks that also use that convention. It all kind of clicks together nicely.
Loose if you're not using Bionic, because you could have multiple stack packs, and let's say that you removed a build pack that was providing, or a stack pack that was providing something called like Heroku utils or something, and then you remove it, and now someone's kind of sat on. They went ahead and published a vulnerable Heroku utils in apt registry somewhere, and it just gets pulled in and suddenly installed. Like I kind of feel like knowing it's a package is important for apt. And like you said, if it's our app, if it's the Buildpacks IO apt, then you can limit it to Bionic or something. But yeah.
Maybe I didn't completely understand. I think what I was trying to say is like, because the build pack can explicitly say, I just work with these stacks, and because the stack is available during build time, the build pack can adjust its behavior if it needs to account for what the stack pack, can adjust its behavior to account for the correct behavior for that stack, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. I still think there might be room in there to accidentally like bring in another stack pack that sort of like supersedes another stack pack's installation, because it's so loose. It's just a string. It doesn't really, like, someone else could get in there and provide it, and provide, like, if you asked for curl and then something else, like it does a more star name filter just like app does, and then it installs its own curl, and then app doesn't get to install it. I don't know. It just feels like it's a little loose.
Yeah.
Makes sense. And this one seems logistical, or maybe it's like less controversial and more just need to figure out something that fits in there. Does that seem? I don't know if we want to.
I like it.
But yeah, we're saying that we do not want to promote the type as a sort of first-class mixin attribute, right?
It's currently not in the spec or promoted anywhere. I wasn't taking an opinion that we shouldn't do it necessarily, but the plans we had in the past were to let mixins be generic, totally loose, any name, because there may be, an example is like you may be using a stack image that doesn't actually support packages, right? Like by codifying a type, and a type is like package, right? If we codified package into the spec especially, then we're starting to make a lot of assumptions about base images that like don't apply on Windows, for instance. But if we just codified a type field existing and didn't codify what the available types are, that wouldn't. And so that's like maybe something you could do in between.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could either define package to mean something more generic than an apt or yum package or whatever, or just use a different term, and still essentially get what we want. Like, I mean, the apt build pack is only going to work on a Debian stack, I assume. So that's like the least of your problems.
Are you saying, Stephen, that that type in this build plan would then be defined by the stack author? Who's defined the stack ID?
That would be a direction we could go to make it work cleanly, but then there's no way of in the stack metadata specifying a type for a mixin. It's currently done with notation that's specific to the Bionic stack that I'm not sure if we want to make more general based on how we've defined a current spec. And so it would need a lot more thought about what types mean and how you encode them in mixin names, and if we need to make a breaking change in the mixin format as it's written on stacks, all that stuff. Make me regret not complaining that mixins should be a list of objects instead of a list of strings.
I hear we haven't won out yet.
Cool. Yeah, I also haven't actually submitted the RFC yet, so happy to work through that. I think the thing that worries me more is how the stack pack makes its way into the order. Like I said, I'd really like it to be a little bit different from the order, such that if you are using a group that doesn't have the stack pack and then you want the mix-in or something like that, you don't suddenly have to understand this whole new stack pack construct, right? It just sort of works if your builder provides it.
As a straw man, what if we always made all the stack packs participate in detection no matter what, if they're on the stack forever and there's no way to configure them? Where does that break down? Given that the mixins are like an or, the stack pack doesn't have to provide them, it can. Where does it break down?
I'm not sure I have an example, but that makes me feel like we would then need sort of the inverse, which is a way to disable them, which maybe that is the right thing to do.
I don't have a strong opinion. I like the idea that if we provide configurability, it'd be outside of order, like like you described. But I also can't think of any reasons why we should provide the functionality to disable them. So, because like the only thing I can think of is, as an app developer, you never want packages to get installed dynamically, and you want it to fail if they're not present on the stack. But at that point, it's like you're trading one failure case for another failure case a little bit, right? Bad performance for failure, and you're an app developer, so you can just not do the bad thing, right?
Right.
In the end.
Yeah, maybe the mechanism is make your own builder.
Right.
Seems like
It also
our top
seems
thought
that-
for a lot of things.
It also
Go ahead,
seems
Matt.
like well-done stack packs authors should be able to create an easy way for the stack pack to not get triggered. Like configurability users can provide somehow.
Environment variables.
Ooh, would they have access? Yeah, so they won't have access to the source code. Like it can't read Project TOML or anything like that. But would it have access to environment variables? Probably.
If they're in the project TOML, maybe, right?
Yeah,
depending
no,
on
things
how you
that are
codify
in the Project TOML could be sent into the build phase or whatever. I think that's fine, but they can't access it themselves.
Right, and since we can specify invars in Project TOML, right? So they would have a way to get some invars into that process to kind of skip detection if they wanted to opt out.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The configurability here is maybe even something we could, put off until we need it. If like, I don't have a strong opinion about it, but it seems like we could proceed without it theoretically.
Yeah, cool. Actually, the big thing that you said is that you are interested in the sort of separation. I was actually assuming that you would want it to be in the order based on some of the stuff we talked about with root build packs. So that's good to know.
Then the order of all the root build packs would be defined by the builder, right? So in whatever specified order there, always, and they always run.
Yeah.
Stack packs.
Stack packs, right? Yeah.
If stack packs are configured or distributed on the stack, then they'll just be sitting on the stack and it gets distributed when pack create builder executes. And there's some metadata somewhere on the stack images to create the resulting build.
So I'm curious about the maybe performance implications where we think about the mix-ins as the thing that gives you like a very early failure if things aren't compatible. But now, since we have like this catch-all or fallback, where then it has to go check the stack packs, is there something that I missed that is preventing that check from happening, like a pattern matching?
The stack packs output the things they can provide dynamically during detection. And
Right, so that
there's-
means it has to execute, right? So there's no way to know statically whether things are compatible without running it.
What is that actually? So I guess to help, maybe part of your question is, why are we outputting that dynamically if they can't see the app directory? Is that kind of the question?
No, I guess I was just thinking whether or not if there was a way to, like if you have mix-ins, right? And you know that, basically if the stack pack could provide a pattern that says, I only respect things that are prefixed with, APT for the sake of argument, right? Then you don't, like, if you know that up front, then you don't have to actually execute the detection phase.
I think that's what I was trying to say also. It's like, because we've made it so that that pattern is output dynamically during the detect process, we can't pre-validate it. And I'm not sure why it needs to be executed dynamically during the detect process if nothing can change, if it can't see a different app directory.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Although I had forgot that when we were talking about root build packs, I think we decided, or at least batted around, that the text phase would have access to the app and just read only as normal, right? And that would work because you don't need to run detect on like an upgrade or something like that. So maybe I need to rethink that. But yeah, I agree. If without the app, I don't think there's any reason to make it dynamic. Yeah.
If you could validate ahead of time, it seems like there's a really big user experience win you can get there by letting the user know that the combination of build packs, stacks they're attempting to put together has no chance of ever succeeding, as opposed to kind of like putting them together, seeing it fail, is missing it, mixing, trying it again.
You can see that for the apt provides. It doesn't really need to be dynamic, right? And also the requiring of a mix-in the project tumble itself. But I know we had come up with cases in the past where another build pack might be dynamically requiring a mix-in on the fly based on what it finds in the app directory, even though the stack pack itself isn't doing that. Like the SQLite Python case.
Right.
Yeah, and I guess that's where the pattern matching. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, like, I guess maybe that's why I was maybe proposing a pattern matching of some sort. If you had a way to say, like, these things can be dynamically provided versus or there is something that could dynamically provide something like this, right? Then you could still have that check be dynamic, but within certain confines that you know ahead of time.
You could figure out when there's a chance it might work.
That makes sense.
Does this provide a way for other build packs to require mix-ins dynamically?
It was supposed to, but I realize now that we're talking about it that the build plan, the additions to the build plan spec are not sufficient for that. But I think I need to rework that so that they are like a provides and requires mix-ins.
So because the stack packs can only provide mix-ins, and because the other build packs can only require mix-ins, I thought that the mix-ins table in the build plan would actually be sufficient, because you would never be like, there's never actually a conflict. It's always just mix-ins in there.
I mean, yes, technically that works. I wonder how confusing or that would be. I don't know.
It'd be contextual, right?
Yeah.
You'd have to know if you're a stack pack or a build pack, because the meaning of mix-ins is different. But it does, from the build pack perspective, the 99% perspective, just put your mixins in the build
Mhm.
plan. Very simple. I like that.
And the build pack, like I've included the privileged flag still. So a build pack has to sort of declare if it can be used as a stack pack by setting that flag. So there's no this build pack can be run both ways or anything like that. A build pack's either one or the other.
Should this be renamed Stack Pack, or is it just a different name?
Should what be renamed?
The Build Pack Toml.
Backpack tumble.
Yeah, Stack Pack Toml. I mean, if we're gonna go all in on the name, might as well, right?
I'm not sure. Well, yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not. I guess I'm confused. Oh, you're saying the file. I see what you're saying. Okay.
Why do you need a privileged equals true if this is a stack pack, right? And then we just call it and build it differently or something. I don't know. But if we like really treat it as something completely different, then there's no way of intermingling them.
Just the danger of using the same thing is that, we have it in the schema and the spec, and then someone writing a normal build pack is like, I want to turn on privilege true. Right.
I mean, it would fail pretty fast. I mean, yeah, I agree. Well, I'm not sure. I guess I'm not settled on how much I want to use the term stack pack as like anything part of the spec. You know what I mean? So that part I hesitate on. Also, like Buildpack Toml doesn't have to be named Buildpack Toml. Like you can pass it foobar.toml if you want. So naming it, I'm not convinced is sufficient.
I think we use it to look up certain things, right? Unless that's configurable. At least for build packs, that's true. We have like a preconceived notion that file is going to be named Buildpack Toml.
Yeah, maybe I'm thinking Project Toml.
I think we're pretty strict that Buildpack Toml has to be called Buildpack Toml in both pack and in a couple places in the lifecycle.
Yeah, I might be wrong about that.
You could imagine stack packs or stack build packs or whatever you call them being published to the registry, being distributed. There'll be less of them, and it's a different. They serve some different functions, right? But like I'm not opposed to them being build packs in the greater sense. I don't know if I would make the switch privileged, if that makes sense, because that maybe implies a little bit less than what it means. Maybe it's like stack or something.
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what we do with root build packs in general. Like the way I kind of phrased it in the RFC is that stack packs are a special case of root build pack. And in the future, we might want to have like a true privileged flag or whatever, where you could put a root build pack in your Project Toml's list of build packs. And that's a thing that like Heroku probably wouldn't even support because it's just really out there, and also breaks rebase and whatever. Or you're really like living on the edge there.
I think the idea of a root build pack that breaks rebase and has some of the dynamicness, like letting you add additional layers, but doesn't add too much complexity, like the complexity that we worked out before, like not opposed to that. That feels like the privilege true, right?
Yeah, right. And that's the thing we were saying, like all the constraints we were putting around them was starting to erode that original idea and get us away from the problem we were trying to solve. But we talked about like, well, if people just keep asking for it after we give them mix-ins, maybe that's something we need to tackle.
Be able to basically do pretty much anything they could do with a root pack with stack packs anyway, right? They could like make up their own mix-in name and then make a stack pack, add it to the builder, and then execute just arbitrary whatever they want as root, right?
But like contractually, if you're on Bionic, you're not allowed to make up your own mix-in name. If you're on like a predefined stack ID, it's stack packs like make us, or they enforce the contracts, right? You can always break the rules as much as you want, but then the things that stack packs will do, like do safe rebase, like replay rebases and things like that, are suddenly you're on your own, right?
Yeah, we still haven't got to Bionic here, Heroku yet either.
Yeah, did we settle the ABI compatibility question? Whether that's going to be an enforcement or not?
Yeah, I was hoping Stephen would weigh in on that.
To think about this, but I think there are aspects where the stack pack must imply ABI compatibility moving forward, because you're going to replay it on the run image and then reuse the same top layers before you do the rebase. And so the changes you made all the code linked must continue to link, right? And so there's definitely aspects of this where the stack pack must guarantee ABI compatibility, because we're explicitly saying for stack packs, rebasing does work, right?
Yeah, I wasn't sure if we wanted to give them the option though, where like a stack pack could say, nope, not me. I need to be rerun. And then we do actually implement the whole upgrade stuff or whatever.
It feels
Or
like
do
a
we
root
just
build
want to?
pack. Sorry.
Yeah, no, yeah, right. I totally agree. Yeah. So I'm happy for this to go down the just rebase works, and stack packs are expected to keep ABI compatibility.
It makes sense from like a language perspective to me, because we say the stacks have to be ABI compatible. So it makes sense that the stack pack has to adhere to the same rules. And that's like where you cross the line from what's stack level into what's the next level in the system.
We also have very explicit language about mix-ins preserving ABI compatibility on upgrades. That's like in the platform spec, written very explicitly. And because this is an extension on top of mix-ins, I think it follows or it's like almost in the spec already, right? That those things have to be preserved.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, and we're really tying this to mix-ins, so that makes sense.
But then root build packs,
right,
right? That's where it goes out the window.
Yeah, and we're putting that aside for now, right? Until we see more of a demand for that.
Yeah, I want to design it such that we can go that root build packs route, but I think we're definitely punting on it as a generic mechanism for now.
How does a stack pack package cache work? Does it have the same mechanism where it replays and then you can designate a chunk of it that gets restored the next time? I didn't see the.
Yeah, that was the. Wait, if I understood what you're saying, and I'm not sure I did, that's this idempotent thing where if it's this is so confusing because I can't come up with a word that means not idempotent. Please help. But if this is
idempotent,
potent, yeah. Unless you set this, it's going to load that previous layer. There's no. Is it? Wait. In the previous RFC, there was no cache. Essentially, you just load the layer.
There was a cache because you could say there was an awkward cache,
not
in a bad way, right? Because you could say like these things aren't included in the launch image, but also they also come back during the next build in the case that it's not, and that's how you could implement. And that was sort of separate from idempotent, which is like, does it rebuild on the previous image or not? Which is different from does it recover the excluded pieces next time? And I think
because in my example here is a little bit broken because this runs the exact same thing on run and build, but like I guess I was thinking that you wouldn't want to do this line, the RMRF, on the build image because you'd want to cache that, but on the run image.
You'd still want to cache it, right?
Yeah, you'd still want to cache it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it could either be a separate cache, or you could recover the. I liked the cleverness of the awkward cache of the exclude this piece, and also it means that you can bring it back next time from your build packs. But also, it's definitely harder to understand than like, here's a thing that gets restored every time in the same place, or you could just something like that into your package cache.
Yeah.
So, I think
so that would the excludes thing would require like launch tunnel though, which is odd. Like in root build pack, I think it wasn't odd, but in stack pack, it's like all that other stuff does not belong.
Build plan. No. It's statically defined wherever we define the mix-ins thing.
I'll think about it. I would like to try and use some existing construct.
That would be a thing that I would definitely want to see, because otherwise the apt-get update's going to take like a million years every time.
Yeah, totally.
Didn't your original app extensions RC, Stephen, like provide a cache directory that was mounted in?
Yep.
Would that be perhaps the solution here?
That's kind of what I was saying. You could either do the awkward cache that's kind of clever and has sort of layer reusability benefits, or you could just provide a separate directory that gets restored every time. I don't have a strong opinion, but I did propose a separate directory in the original one.
I sort of like the simplicity of like if a stack pack maybe in its Buildpack toml can specify certain directories, and then you mount a cache that we derive from the name of the thing into that mount point every time we do a upgrade.
Yeah, and
it's very simple.
And you could also put the mixins in Buildpack toml too.
That would really be a stack pack toml, I think, at that point. Or we could say that just defining those things implicitly makes it a stack pack.
I don't know if I would, like, because I think I align with a lot of what you said, where we have build packs and there's a lot of different types of build packs. Like we already deviate in some cases for a meta build pack versus a concrete build pack, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then now we're going to have these stack build packs. And so I do think maybe making it more obvious that all these different type of build packs exist, and therefore their configuration could be different, and maybe, figure out a way to really make that clear would be a better approach than to totally deviate the object.
I agree with Javier there. Like it really breaks the concept down if you deviate a ton.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if there's in my classic put my Rust hat on thing, but they have the concept with Cargo for build like release profiles or like basic profiles that basically have a default set of configurations. So you can have like potentially non-idempotent and privileged as common primitives, I guess, that you manually could set, but then there's like a stack profile that automatically sets a bunch of stuff for you. And then when we add root build pack, that like it maybe just sets privilege to true or something. But as a user, like you don't have to know necessarily what all these flags do.
Yeah, I'll think about that some more, because I like where you're going with that, but I don't completely see it.
Are you talking about like scaffolding, Terrence?
Kind of. I guess like the specific example in Cargo is like they have like for Cargo build, you have like dev and release and other things. And basically there's like default configuration for that, but you can always manually like override any of those things in your kind of Cargo toml. So imagine for most users, right? Like I'm not thinking about, like if I'm building a stack pack, I'm not thinking about like that this is privileged true or that like non-idempotent or whatever, right? Like I probably actually at the end of the day just want a stack pack. Like don't make me think about that I have to set these two other flags to like get that functionality, right?
Yeah, I guess the downside there is that it isn't something that you could share as easily as a configuration file, right? If you have to pass them via command.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it has to be done via command, but
yeah, I wonder if the top level key, well, yeah, I don't know, maybe that's not any better than changing the file name. But if you could use that top level key as a mutually exclusive, it's a stack pack, root pack, build pack kind of thing. But that's somewhat limiting too if we ever want to put more behind.
Yeah.
Like, have multiple profiles. Yeah.
Hey, we've got type up there. You could just use it here as well. Just start putting type everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought about that too, but I didn't know if we wanted to proliferate that everywhere. And it potentially becomes weird if root build pack is like a superset of stack pack or something.
Mm-hmm.
We're 1 minute left before time. Joe, did we cover everything that you wanted to cover?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot more to think about with this. I had gotten to a point where I needed to bounce some of this off of everybody and before I kept moving forward with it. So I'm happy to keep going and bring it back next week or tomorrow or something.
I really like where this is going. I'm excited about it. Fits
Cool.
well with the different use cases I think we've talked about. I got to drop. Thanks, everybody.